Good evening. My name is Andrew Cole, and I'm the Director of Campus Ministry at Thomas More University. Thank you for those joining us in person, but also on Zoom. And this is being recorded, so spread the word. We do plan, but when wants a copy, it can be distributed later. I'm going to begin with an opening prayer tonight for our speaker, and this prayer is from St. John Henry Newman, who wrote the book The Idea of a University, which is a very relevant topic for discussion of our talk tonight, Catholic Universities, So What? Very thought-provoking title for a timely topic, Thomas More University, as we emphasize Catholic identity. I'll begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me, which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. May never know what it is in this life, but I shall be told in the next. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for nothing. I shall do good. I shall do his work. Therefore, I will trust him. Whatever, wherever I am, I cannot be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. He does nothing in vain. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends. He may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirits sink, hide my future from me. Still, he knows what he is about. We pray for the intercession of St. John Henry Newman, pray for us, and St. Thomas More, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. So I just wanted to offer a brief introduction for our speaker. Our speaker, his name is Mr. Trenton Mattingly, graduate of Bellarmine University to the south of us. Kind of a sister school, and also went to graduate school at the University of Notre Dame University. He actually has experience also in campus ministry, but is currently the director of the Nazareth Retreat Center in Bardstown, Kentucky, and has done a great deal of good at that operation. And he has also written for Life Team and done other articles. He's done some writing with in terms of catechetics and some very good timely articles. So I'm going to invite Trenton to come up to the podium, and he is going to be talking again about Catholic universities. Why?
Hey, thank you. Before I get started, I just, for those of you that are in here and those of you on Zoom, I just want you all to know that I'm grateful that you're here and for your presence this evening. I've been around campus, of course, for the majority of the day today, and I've really enjoyed my time here. This is clearly a pretty special place, wonderful faculty, staff, and student body, too. I've been very honored to have been part of the community for a day and to be invited to speak to it as well. And so I'd also like to offer a special thanks to Andrew Cole and Heather Konerman, who have kept in touch and worked with me over the past several months to plan me to come speak here. And I'd also like, of course, thank all the professors who allowed me to take up some of their valuable class time today to speak with their students. I hope that what I said then and what I have to say to you this evening will be worth the trouble. So to go ahead and get started, I, of course, tonight, as Andrew mentioned, would like to talk to you a bit about the value of attending a university that is distinctly Catholic and why someone should choose a Catholic university over the possible alternatives. But to do that well, I think I'll need to start by giving a brief overview of the history of the university as an institution came to be. And I want to do this because I think that helps seeing that big picture, seeing that historical scope, will help to give a greater appreciation of being part of something like Thomas More University. This context, in my view, will help you more easily place yourselves in continuity with that tradition and with one of the greatest accomplishments of the human race. And I really don't think that's an overstatement. And hopefully I'm able to convince you of that through what I have to say this evening. So with that said, I want to take things all the way back to the 3rd and 4th centuries. This is when the first organized Christian religious monastic communities began to take shape. There are a lot of really interesting and unique things to discuss about these communities, their origins, and also their practices. But most relevant to our topic at hand this evening is the fact that there is great evidence showing us that even in these earliest religious communities, that there was a frequent emphasis on the facilitation of the intellectual life. And I think that's most clearly seen through these common mandatory reading requirements that were found in these communities, wherein one was not considered to be following the proper role of the community, if not regularly engaged in intellectual reading. And one of the most significant, most well-known examples of this mandatory reading, although there were examples that predated this one as well, is the 6th century Rule of Saint Benedict, which of course was written by Saint Benedict of Nursia and was intended to provide guidelines for monastic communal living. And this document, not only is reading seen as a mandatory activity at certain times, but in an amusing turn, it is actually suggested that a few members of the community patrol during times designated for reading to ensure that other members of the community are actually doing it. Not playing games, not chit-chatting, not sitting around idly. Just kind of imagine, being here at Thomas More and having to have staff patrol the library to make sure students are actually on task and studying. I think that's just kind of a funny thing to imagine. But in all seriousness, when you consider that at the height of the Benedictine order, and this is just Benedictines, there were other monastic orders as well, other religious communities, that there were over 37,000 Benedictine monasteries, just Benedictine monasteries alone. And so the influence of these kind of mandatory reading requirements, the influence of this emphasis on the formation of the intellect, especially in a time where literacy was not really widespread, really can't be overstated. It's also interesting to note that this influence isn't really negligible in modern times either. When you consider that, for example, just at Thomas More University, that it was founded by Benedictine sisters and have educated hundreds and hundreds of students that have proceeded to scatter themselves throughout the world. So that's something to think about. Their influence still carries quite a bit of weight to this day. But to get back on track, by the 6th century, Cassiodorus, a retired Roman statesman who later became a monk, developed and began to circulate a curriculum of classical Greek and Latin texts, the liberal arts, and also some religious texts throughout monasteries and schools. And that was kind of his life stream at that point in time, was to open a school and have this curriculum taught in it. And so this curriculum and the instructions that were provided for how it should be engaged with inspired many religious communities to begin emphasizing the preservation of texts, copying them, and building their own library collections. These monastic library connections would end up saving a lot of knowledge that was destroyed during times of widespread violence and plague. If you're anything of a history buff, you may be aware that libraries and higher places of learning were almost never spared during invasions of hostile armies. So these ended up being a very important resource for the preservation and dissemination of knowledge as time went on. And then in 527 AD, we have the earliest evidence of the Catholic Church establishing a formal cathedral school through a gathering of bishops known as the Second Council of Toledo. These cathedral schools would eventually become widespread throughout Europe and were primarily, at least initially, concerned with the education of the clergy and also the nobility, who would both hopefully go on to spread some of their knowledge among their flock, their subjects, and those that they had influence with. Then to skip ahead a bit, in 789 AD, we have Charlemagne, the Catholic king of the Franks and eventual Holy Roman Emperor, decreeing that all cathedrals and monasteries in his jurisdiction, which were quite large, must open their own schools. Charlemagne had a well-known interest in education and encouraged, facilitated, and reformed education throughout his reign. And in fact, one of the classes that I sat in on earlier today was a medieval European history class, and the professor there kind of reminded his students that Charlemagne actually called for all men and women to be educated, but at that time that that was too lofty of a goal to actually be achieved. But that it's a stunning example of kind of the Catholic influence, the Catholic dedication to the development of higher education, to the intellectual formation of the human person. And so many of these monastic and cathedral schools that were established by Charlemagne would eventually, over time, evolve into the first universities, or at least the universities as we recognize them today. And the kind of specific definition that we want to use to define what these universities were corporatized institutions of higher learning that granted degrees and credentials with a set course of study provided by a professional faculty over a set duration of time, a certain time period. So as you might notice that there's quite a bit of similarity to what university and college experiences are like to this day. But I do want to stop and make a quick distinction there before going further. That definition that I just provided is actually a pretty important one, a pretty important distinction when discussing this topic, because anyone with any kind of rudimentary historical literacy will definitely be able to call to mind that there were certainly ancient institutions of higher learning that predated the Catholic Church or had nothing to do with the Catholic Church. And I just want to be clear here that that is most certainly true. I mean, just consider like your ancient Greek or Roman history, education was clearly valued in those societies. But why scholars don't generally consider those places of those educational institutions in those times to be truly considered a university is because those lacked that same corporatized structure of staff and students. They also lacked the more universal acknowledgement of credentials, and not always, but they often also lacked the same degree of continual interest over time, and would sometimes dissolve fairly rapidly after their founding. Sometimes in response to the death of a highly esteemed or respected teacher, or even a squabble with local authorities who just found the education that was going on there too troublesome and needed to be discontinued. And so I think these are important distinctions. So I just wanted to provide that additional context to justify my claim that the university system that we are so familiar with today can be credited to have sprung forth in large part because of the Catholic Church, because of Catholicism. But to get back on track with the brief history that I was trying to provide you with, since most of the earliest universities evolved from monastic or cathedral schools, or sometimes just informal gatherings of well-educated scholars, we don't really have an exact date that the first university truly took shape, but generally the University of Bologna in Italy is considered to be the first and has a foundation date of 1088 AD. But I think it's worthy to note that in Bologna, that it had actually, in that location, that it had actually already been educating students and been considered a pretty prestigious place to go and learn long before 1088 AD. And then I also want to point out that the Catholic Church was in most cases very supportive and continually supportive of these universities as they developed and as they grew. And I'd like to provide you all with a few examples of that continual support. One example to start, locals that surrounded a university often weren't very fond of the university, or more particularly the university students themselves. The stereotype of university students was that they were a more kind of transient population that didn't stay in one place very often, that they partied too much, that they were often drunk in the streets, and that they cared very little for the area that they temporarily resided in. And so I guess that just sounds like some things never changed, although I'm sure that's not true of the great students here. But because of this reputation, they were often scorned and were easy targets for harassment and extortion by the locals. They were often subjected to vastly unfair treatment by local politicians and tribunals for their misbehavior. And Pope stepped in on many different occasions to provide various protections for university students and also their staff. For example, there was one papal bull issued that made it strictly forbidden to enact physical violence toward university students and provided them with the right to be tried by an ecclesial court instead of a possibly more biased local secular court. The papacy also played a crucial role in allowing universities to be governed autonomously. This was significant because that meant that the universities couldn't be controlled or disbanded by those very same occasionally malicious whims of the local populace and their governments. And when those that actually had the authority to govern the universities became involved in some more spurious practices, the popes weren't above stepping in those situations too and forcing them to behave more appropriately. For example, in doing research for this presentation, I actually was reading about four separate popes, at least four separate popes that intervened to force various university authorities to actually pay their professors so that their professors could stay in their profession. The university had decided to withhold their wages, and the popes thought that that was inappropriate and stepped in to make sure that they were paid their just wages. And then one last major example I'd like to provide of the church stepping in to provide its support to the university system is that of Pope Gregory IX decreeing the universality of degrees granted by universities. A degree granted by one university was to be acknowledged as authoritative and legitimately conferring the ability to teach at other universities. This established a more collegial, scholarly academic community that more willingly participated in the widespread dissemination, discussion, and debate of knowledge. And this was a vast improvement because prior to that, and it continued on for some time even after Pope Gregory IX's declaration, but prior to that, universities often viewed other degrees and credentials with extreme skepticism. You know, they didn't necessarily trust that their curriculums, that their professors were as good as theirs, and maybe wouldn't view that those credentials granted by other universities to be as valuable. And so I'd like to emphasize that this support wasn't just, you know, a medieval fad. It wasn't just a unique occurrence to the earlier days of the church. The Catholic Church's interest in the university and emphasis on the holistic formation of the human being has never really faded, even though many of the universities originally founded and nourished by the church have since gone through various phases of secularization. Just consider where we stand this evening. We are in a distinctly Catholic university that just 100 years ago was founded by Benedictine sisters. And then also consider that in 1990, Pope John Paul II promulgated Ex Corde Ecclesiae, a type of document known as an apostolic constitution that contained a passionate call for bishops to promote Catholic universities in their jurisdiction and support their students and staff. And then this document also provided a detailed description of the identity, mission, and norms of governance of a Catholic university. And then as late as 2019, Pope Francis, who is of course our current Pope, met with leaders of Catholic universities from across the world to encourage and challenge them to continue to form their student bodies, to form their students to be socially responsible proponents of the common good with an informed view of the human person and their inherent dignity and of the world in general. And I want to invite everyone kind of listening to ponder how truly incredible the implications of this are for you. How truly incredible the implications are of this continued fostering, encouragement, developing of the university. Just by being one small part of the university community, St. Thomas More University, whether you are a student, alumni, faculty, or staff member, you are taking part in a tradition, a storied legacy that is hundreds of years in the making, that in large part owes its existence to one of the oldest, if not the oldest, continually operating institution in the world, the Catholic Church. So I don't think you have to be Catholic to have an appreciation of the scale of the significance of this. In my opinion, there's no reason to downplay that you are playing a small part, a small role in one of the most monumental and impressive achievements of humanity. I would consider that an incredible privilege and something to be proud of. But for those that are interested to learn about what is distinct and impressive about a university that is distinctly Catholic, beyond the mere historical significance of it, I'd like to return to the document that I referenced earlier, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, that was written by Pope John Paul II. I think this is a great place to start with understanding the Catholic University as a concept, because not only does it govern many Catholic universities across the world to this day, but it is also fairly brief, and it does a good job of thoroughly discussing this topic in a pretty contemporary fashion. You know, there's not a lot of jargon that you might not understand. It's pretty easily accessible. And then just as like a fun bit of trivia, if you've spent much time looking at the official website for Thomas More, you will actually find references to this document scattered all throughout it. So that kind of displays its continued significance in the world. So with a brief history of the church's role in the formation and continued nourishment of the university out of the way, I just want to dive into that document a bit before I leave you this evening and illuminate some of the qualities of Catholic universities that are distinct and valuable. So John Paul II begins this document with a definition of what a university is, and I'll paraphrase his definition here. The university has always been recognized as the incomparable center of creativity and dissemination of knowledge for the good of humanity. By vocation, it is dedicated to research, to teach, and to the education of students who freely associate with their teachers and a common love of knowledge. With every other university, it shares the joy of truth, of searching for, discovering, and communicating truth in every field of knowledge. The Catholic University's task is to unite, by the intellect, two orders of reality, the search for truth while already knowing the fount of all truth. And I want to pause on the last part of that gorgeous definition there for a moment, because I think it illumines something that is very beautiful about the Catholic intellectual tradition and the motivations behind it. Let me read that part again. A Catholic university's task is to unite, by the intellect, two orders of reality, the search for truth while already knowing the fount of all truth. This highlights that there is knowledge that is revealed to us by God and knowledge that is discovered through using our intellect and our reason. The Catholic University acknowledges that if both of these realities really do exist, then we must deal with both of them, put them into dialogue with one another, research them, scrutinize them, and synthesize them when possible. This is done for the sake of the cause of truth, as Pope John Paul II puts it. And there is this cause for truth in the first place because for the Catholic, the possession of knowledge, whether discovered or revealed, whether a theological truth or a scientific truth, is considered inherently good in and of itself, and that we've been given the faculties to pursue these truths because God desires for us to know them. And why? Because it makes it possible for us to more fully know God, which again, to the Catholic, is the entire purpose of our lives. If this is the case, when you discover something that is more than nominally true, you have stumbled across more than just an interesting fact or something that can be applied in a practical way to make your life better. You have stumbled across God, you've stumbled across God's handiwork. And as beings that are understood to have been made in God's image, these truths also tell us about who we are as human beings, our inherent dignity, and also the purpose of our existence in general. As you might imagine, these sort of ideas clearly have a lot to do with why the church has approached education with such incredible motivation and vigor throughout the centuries. And I find that particularly beautiful and unique that in a Catholic university, the pursuit of knowledge, the goal of education, is more than just a practical endeavor undertaken with the hope that one will eventually secure a degree with it. It's a passionate pursuit of the divine. It's a pursuit of meaning. It's a pursuit that helps humanity to know and form itself. How beautiful it is to be part of an intellectual tradition that pursues knowledge for the sake and love of knowledge. How beautiful it is to be part of an intellectual tradition that pursues knowledge because it reveals the dignity of the human person. How beautiful it is to be part of an intellectual tradition that pursues knowledge because it reveals the divine. John Paul II also notes that a Catholic university is distinct because it allows for a moral component and a consideration of social justice that aims at the goal of authentic human flourishing and the promotion of the common good to be sown throughout all fields of knowledge. It is of immeasurable value to apply the questions of right and wrong in the pursuit of enlightenment and formation of a society's citizens. To me, a society with citizens who are willing to take ethical considerations seriously in the application of knowledge is a healthy society. John Paul II found this especially true in his world and today's world because technological and scientific advancements continue to progress so quickly. People often don't consider the implications or consequences regarding the good of humanity in recent developments because of how fast our lives are, how fast progress goes, and how fast we move on to the next thing. And at times, because of these very rapid developments, progress begins to be considered an unstoppable force, and that anything that furthers progress can be legitimately pursued at all costs. However, I would argue that progress at the expense of violating human dignity is not truly progress at all. For example, in 1932, researchers at Tuskegee University in Alabama tracked the progress of syphilis in hundreds of Black men by allowing them to suffer and die without ever diagnosing them or offering medical treatments that could have cured them, although they had them at the time. As you might imagine, some useful data may have been gathered from this study, but I think that we can ask if that was worth the cost. Where were the people asking if this was the right thing to do? Where were the people asking if the knowledge pursued, if the knowledge achieved by this study was worth obtaining at the expense of human lives? And I think, unfortunately, most unfortunately, that isn't something that has been left in the past. That's something that's very much with us today. In 2008, for example, a report published by the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations revealed a common practice of conducting medical trials in poor countries due to more lax regulations and decreased likelihood for bad press. And this sometimes came with deadly consequences. Like in one example, 14 Ugandan women died after trialing a medication that was meant to prevent HIV transmission. And so once again, was the knowledge obtained by these trials worth the 14 lives that it claimed? What type of education did these researchers receive to not even have the questions of right and wrong in mind while seeking progress and truth? Considering situations like these, I feel confidently in stating and claiming that it will always be immensely valuable and timeless to weave moral considerations throughout every field of knowledge to try and provide an antidote to evil when things have a tendency to go wrong in these situations. There should be a healthy appreciation that these moral considerations and the pursuit of the common good are fundamental parts of the mission and framework of the Catholic University. This makes them an incredible asset not only to local communities, but also to the rest of the world. As St. John Henry Newman put it in one of his many lectures on the idea of a university, the church fears no knowledge, but she purifies all. She represses no element of our nature, but cultivates the whole. And this sentiment matches closely with another emphasis found in Ex Corde Ecclesiae, the integration of all fields of knowledge. John Paul II passionately attacked increasingly widespread educational philosophies that are too prone to the compartmentalization of knowledge or the entire cutting out of some fields of knowledge entirely. And it seems that this warning was quite prophetic if you look at the state of where university education is headed in many places. Entire humanities departments are being cut at various universities left and right, and universities in most places, in many places, have largely taken over the responsibility of training future employees, which is something that, this is up for debate, but maybe should arguably be left up to employers instead of, and then this is done, of course, instead of staying true to their original mission, to molding minds to love the pursuit of truth. And John Paul II noted that it is distinct of the Catholic University to oppose this trend and instead be unafraid to zoom out from the situation, look at the big picture, be unafraid to see how various fields of knowledge interact with one another, and again, synthesize them when possible. I know that at my time at a Catholic liberal arts university, students often complained about needing to take courses outside of their majors. After all, if I'm a biology major, shouldn't I just be studying biology? Why do I need to take 2 philosophy courses? Or if I'm a theology major, why do I need to be wasting my time in a chem lab? And John Paul II had an answer to that direct question, because pursuing such a limited scope of knowledge is against the spirit of love of truth. If knowledge is good for its own sake, and knowledge teaches us about ourselves, and knowledge unveils the face of God, then the Catholic University has a responsibility to avoid a compartmentalized education at all costs. Because if it doesn't, it has deprived you of a holistic intellectual formation and has considered some legitimate fields of knowledge as irrelevant to you in consideration of the big picture. And so I think I could go on about this document for quite some time. There's a lot more to it than that. But at this point, I feel like I've hit most of the main ideas, and that will hopefully allow you to see why a Catholic university still has a very important role to play in today's world. I hope the question of why attend a Catholic university, why attend Thomas More University, has been at least somewhat answered for you. When staying true to its foundational principles and missions, I really do believe that it provides an educational experience that truly cannot be found anywhere else. I believe that students of Catholic universities are disproportionately bestowed with a genuine love of truth, whether it be found in sacred scripture or in a chemistry textbook, and are given the tools to see God in both. I also believe that a Catholic university bestows students with a compassionate and responsible desire to pursue the common good throughout their entire lives. And I pray and hope that this will be true for many years to come at Thomas More University. Thank you all for your time. That was really all I had to say tonight on the topic. Um, so I believe that at this time, if anyone had any questions, I'm open to try to do my best to answer answer what you have in store.